The siren was a knife, carving through the wet, heavy air of a Tuesday night. It grew from a distant whine to a gut-rattling shriek that slapped against the windows of the Mercy General Emergency Room. Inside, Sarah Jenkins didn't flinch. She was an island of calm in a sea of controlled chaos, a world that smelled of antiseptic, stale coffee, and the faint, metallic tang of fear. For 12 hours, she had been navigating this sea, a world of beeping monitors, weeping relatives, and the steady, rhythmic squeak of gurneys on scuffed linoleum. "Coming in hot!" a paramedic yelled, shoving the glass doors open with his back. "Single vehicle MVC rollover, we've got 3. Sarah was already moving, her worn sneakers silent on the floor. The first gurney held a man, his face a swollen mask of blood and bruises, an oxygen mask fogging with each ragged breath. The second held a woman, conscious but wild-eyed with shock, her arm bent at an unnatural angle. But it was the third gurney that made Sarah's breath catch. On it lay a child, no older than 7, his small body terrifyingly still amidst the tangle of straps and medical equipment. A nasty, crescent-shaped gash wept blood above his temple. "Pediatric male, approximately 7, unresponsive on scene," a young paramedic recited, his voice tight with adrenaline. "GCS3, pupils sluggish, vitals are dropping." "Trauma 1 now." Dr. Evans, the attending physician, barked, his usual weariness replaced by sharp-edged focus. The team descended like a well-oiled machine. Sarah was at the child's side, her fingers expertly finding the thready pulse in his neck while another nurse began cutting away his soaked clothes. "Pulse is 140 and thready," she called out, her voice clear and steady. "Let's get a line in wide-bore cannula. I need PED's crash cart." The boy's mother, Elena, was trying to get off her own gurney, her face a canvas of pure terror. "Leo! Mihijo!" she cried, her voice raw. "Please, my boy!" A nurse tried to gently restrain her. "Ma'am, we need to look at your arm." As the team worked on Leo, stabilizing him for the critical trip to the CT scanner, Sarah saw Officer Miller walk in. He was a familiar sight, a man whose weary posture suggested he'd seen every form of human misery the city had to offer. He stood near the entrance, his notepad out, his presence casting a different kind of chill in the room, the cold front of bureaucracy rolling into their storm of medical urgency. He approached the charge nurse. "I need to get a statement from the female passenger, and I need IDs on all of them." The vehicle was unregistered. Sarah's focus remained on Leo, but her ears tuned into the new threat. She felt it like a change in barometric pressure. After Leo was whisked away towards the humming maw of the CT machine, she saw Miller approaching Elena, who was now sitting on a gurney in the hallway, a thin blanket draped over her shaking shoulders. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Miller," he began, his tone flat and official. "I need your name. Do you have any identification? A driver's license? Passport?" Elena stared at him, her eyes wide with a fear that seemed to eclipse her physical pain. She shook her head, clutching the blanket tighter. "No, no papers," she whispered, the words barely audible. Miller's expression didn't change, but his posture hardened slightly. It was a look Sarah had seen 100 times. The moment a person went from being a victim to being a case file. Stepping forward, Sarah placed herself gently between them. "Officer, with all due respect, her son was just taken for an emergency CT scan for a potential brain bleed. Her husband is unconscious. Can we please give her a moment? Patient care has to come first." Miller's gaze shifted to her, his eyes lingering on her name badge. He was annoyed, but the argument was unassailable. "For now." "Fine," he conceded, his voice clipped. "But this room isn't a sanctuary. I'll need to run their names as soon as you have them. Standard procedure. No ID at an accident scene. I've got to follow up. I'll be back." He walked away, but his presence remained, a promise of complications to come. Sarah turned back to Elena, offering a small, reassuring smile. But inside, a cold knot was forming in her stomach. This was more than just a car crash, and it was about to get a lot more complicated. An hour later, the news was as good as it could be. Leo had a severe concussion and a small epidural hematoma, but the bleed seemed to have stabilized. Dr. Evans had admitted him to the pediatric ICU for close observation. Marco, the father, was intubated and unconscious but stable. The immediate crisis had passed, replaced by the slow, grinding machinery of the hospital itself. That machinery had a face, and its name was Richard Thompson. The summons came via a sterile email notification on the nurse's station computer. "Ms. Jenkins, Please report to my office at your earliest convenience. R. Thompson. Thompson's office was on the top floor, a world away from the visceral reality of the ER. It was a landscape of glass, chrome, and muted grays, with a panoramic view of the city's glittering skyline. It was an office designed to make one feel small. Thompson himself, a man in a perfectly tailored suit with hair that looked expensively sculpted, did nothing to dispel that feeling. He gestured to a chair without making eye contact, his attention fixed on a tablet. "Miss Jenkins," he began, his voice as smooth and cool as the glass on his desk. "I've been briefed on the situation regarding the family from the rollover accident." "They're stable for now," Sarah said, sitting on the edge of the uncomfortable leather chair. "Good. That's what we do. We stabilize." He finally looked up, his eyes holding no warmth. "I also had a conversation with Officer Miller from the city police department. He informs me the family is, in his professional opinion, undocumented." Sarah remained silent. It wasn't a question. "You understand the hospital's policy regarding non-citizen patients without insurance or legal status?" he continued, his tone that of a teacher explaining a simple concept to a slow student. "My priority was stabilizing a critically injured 7-year-old, Mr. Thompson." A condescending smile ghosted across his lips. "Of course, a commendable sentiment. And our excellent doctors will continue to provide the necessary care. I emphasize necessary because our legal and financial obligations are quite clear. Once the child is medically stable for transporting, that is a medical, not an emotional, determination. We are required to report their status to the appropriate authorities. We are a hospital, Miss Jenkins, not a charity, and certainly not a sanctuary. We cannot be the city's safety net. Am I clear?" The rage, hot and sharp, pricked at the back of Sarah's neck. He spoke of Leo as if he were a leaky pipea problem, to be patched up just enough before passing the liability on to someone else. "And the parents?" Sarah asked, her voice tight. "Will be discharged as soon as medically advisable. Their care from that point on is a federal matter, not a concern of Mercy General." He leaned forward, the smile gone. "Your job is to administer medicine and follow doctors' orders. It is not to involve yourself in the legal, social, or political affairs of the people who pass through those ER doors. Stick to your duties. It's cleaner that way." The dismissal was clear. As Sarah walked out of the frigid office and back toward the noise and messy humanity of the hospital, the phrase echoed in her mind. It's cleaner that way. It was the mantra of the man who never had to get his hands dirty. Her shift was over, but she couldn't leave. She went up to the PICU, a quiet, hushed place where the only sounds were the soft beeps and whirs of life-sustaining machines. She found Elena in the small, desolate waiting room, staring blankly at a generic landscape painting on the wall. The fight had gone out of her, leaving behind a hollowed-out exhaustion. Sarah sat down next to her, not speaking, just offering her presence. She thought of her Babcia, her Polish grandmother, who had arrived in America with nothing but a cardboard suitcase and a handful of stories. Stories of fear, of hiding in barns, of the single act of kindness from a German farmer that saved her from freezing to death. Babcia always said you could see a person's soul in how they treated the helpless. "There are rule followers," she used to say in her thick accent, "and there are people followers. You must choose which one you are, Sarunia." After a long silence, Elena finally spoke, her voice a rough whisper. "He said, policeman? He call immigration?" Sarah's heart ached. "We're just focused on Leo right now," she said, the words feeling like a lie. Elena turned to look at her, her dark eyes searching Sarah's face. She must have seen something there, not pity, but a flicker of understanding, of shared humanity. She began to speak, the words tumbling out in a fractured mix of Spanish and English, a story pieced together from shards of trauma. They hadn't come from Mexico. They had come from El Salvador. Marco had owned a small auto repair shop. A local faction of the MS-13 had tried to force him to work for them, to use his shop to modify their vehicles, to be their mechanic. He had refused. "He is a good man," Elena whispered, tears tracing paths through the grime on her cheeks. "He say no, so they say okay. But they come to our house. They say Leo is a handsome boy. They say it would be a shame if he get hurt." The threat was unmistakable, a cold blade against their son's throat. They had fled that night, selling everything for a pittance to a coyote who promised them passage north. They ran for their lives. Then, Elena delivered the final, chilling blow. The car crash hadn't been an accident. For the last 2 days, she had noticed a dark sedan following them. On that rain-slicked road, it had come up fast behind them, rammed their bumper once, twice, and then a third time, sending their small car spinning off the road and into the ravine. "They find us!" she choked out, her body racked with a fresh wave of sobs. "The police, immigration, they send us back. If we go back, they kill Marco. They kill me. They kill my Leo." In that sterile, quiet waiting room, everything shifted for Sarah. This was no longer about rules or hospital policy. This wasn't about legal status or insurance coverage. The Hippocratic oath, to first do no harm, suddenly expanded beyond the sterile field of medicine. Sending this family back, or even allowing them to be entered into a system where they could be found, was not a neutral act. It was an act of harm. It was pushing them back into the path of the wolves. She looked at this terrified, broken woman, and she saw not a patient or a case file, but a reflection of her own grandmother. She saw a human being, and she knew what she had to do. Returning to the ER to sign out, she walked past the main nurse's station. There it was, on the counter. A thin manila folder. The temporary chart created during the initial chaos. On the tab, scrawled in haste, were the names: Garcia, Marco, Elena, Leo. Inside were the preliminary notes, the few details they had gathered before everything had been transferred to the electronic system. It was the only physical link, the genesis of their official record in this place. The blinking cursor on the admission screen seemed to mock her. Social security number, insurance provider, address. With a deep breath that did little to calm the frantic drumming in her chest, Sarah walked over to the counter. She picked up the folder. Her hands were steady, a strange disconnect from the turmoil inside her. She looked around. The charge nurse was on the phone, her back to Sarah. A doctor was scribbling notes. No one was watching. She walked toward the large, locked bin for documents slated for shredding. Nearby, a cart was overflowing with old magazines and discarded paperwork from a recent office cleanout. It was a perfect storm of bureaucratic clutter. In one fluid, seemingly clumsy motion, Sarah pretended to stumble, knocking the teetering pile of papers from the cart. They scattered across the floor in a cascade of white. "Oh, for crying out loud!" she muttered, bending down. Amidst the flurry of picking up old memos and junk mail, her hand, holding the Garcia family's chart, slipped it deep into the pile destined for the shredder. It disappeared without a trace. Straightening up, she walked back to the charge nurse, who was just getting off the phone. "Hey Barb, have you seen the paper chart for the MVC family? The Garcias? I can't find it anywhere to finish the transfer to the EMR." Barb waved a dismissive hand. "Probably got lost in the shuffle when they went up to CT and ICU. Just create a new temporary file. We'll have to list them as John and Jane Doe until the husband is extubated and can give us the info again. What a mess." "Tell me about it," Sarah said, her voice betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She had done it. She had erased them, just for a little while. She had bought them time. But as she finally walked out of the hospital into the pre-dawn gray, she knew she hadn't solved a problem. She had just started a war. The next 12 hours were a masterclass in psychological warfare. The hospital, once a place of purpose for Sarah, transformed into a hostile landscape, every hallway a potential ambush, every conversation laced with hidden meaning. Richard Thompson became her shadow. He didn't need to say anything. His presence was enough. He'd appear at the far end of a corridor, watching her. He'd stand silently by the nurse's station, observing the flow of information. He found her while she was checking on a patient in the main ER. "Ms. Jenkins," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial. "An update on our does in the PICU? It's been hours. The lack of identification is becoming a significant administrative and, shall we say, legal headache. We pride ourselves on efficiency here." "The woman is still too distraught to speak clearly, and the man remains intubated, Mr. Thompson," Sarah replied, her voice a carefully constructed wall of professional calm. "As soon as his status changes, we'll have the information." "See that you do," he said, before gliding away, leaving a trail of icy displeasure in his wake. Her next battle was with Dr. Evans. She found him in the doctor's lounge, staring into a cup of coffee as if it held the answers to the universe. She closed the door behind her. "David, we need to talk about the Garcia family," she began, dropping the professional formalities. He sighed, not looking at her. "Sarah, don't. They're going to be killed if they're sent back," she pressed, her voice a desperate whisper. The accident wasn't an accident. They were targeted. Dr. Evans ran a hand over his tired face. And you know this for sure? Or is this based on the word of a terrified woman in shock? I believe her, don't you? He looked at her then, and she saw the conflict in his eyes. He was a good man, a good doctor, but he was also a man with a family, a mortgage, and a hard-won career. What I believe doesn't matter, he said, his voice heavy with resignation. What matters is what I can prove. What matters is the law. Thompson has already had a preliminary conversation with hospital legal. They were very clear. If we are perceived as actively conspiring to harbor undocumented immigrants, we could face federal charges. Obstruction. Aiding and abetting. Do you know what that would do to my license? To yours? I took an oath to save lives, Sarah. But I can't do that if I'm in a courtroom or a jail cell. My hands are tied. His cowardice, so reasonable and so complete, was more infuriating than Thompson's open hostility. He was abandoning them, abandoning her, cloaking it in the guise of pragmatism. She was alone in this. The final turn of the screw came late that afternoon. Officer Miller returned, his patience worn to a nub. He strode directly to the PICU nurse's station, where Sarah was reviewing charts. He didn't bother with pleasantries. It's been over 12 hours, he said, his voice hard. I've been more than patient. I need names for my report. You are telling me, a police officer, that in a hospital full of medical professionals, no one has managed to identify these three people? His accusation hung in the air, thick and dangerous. Lying to an administrator was one thing. Lying to law enforcement was another. This was a line she had never imagined crossing. She looked him straight in the eye, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. The patient in your investigation, Leo Garcia, is a 7-year-old child who is fighting for his life. His mother has not left his side and is consumed with grief. His father is on a ventilator. My focus, and the focus of this entire unit, has been on them, not on your paperwork. I am sorry for the delay, officer, but we are doing our best in a difficult situation. It was a masterful deflection, wrapping her lie in a cloak of medical righteousness. Miller was stymied. He couldn't argue against it without looking like a monster, but his eyes narrowed with suspicion. He knew something was wrong. This is my last visit, he said, his voice low and menacing. You have until the end of my shift at 10 p.m. to get me those names. If you don't, I'm not just filing a report. I'm kicking this upstairs to the regional ice field office. Let them sort it out. He turned and walked away. The clock wasn't just ticking anymore. It was a bomb. The ultimatum came at 8:45 p.m. The catalyst was a junior nurse, a young woman named Candy, who was perpetually trying to climb the hospital ladder. Candy, eager to score points, had reluctantly reported to Thompson that she thought she might have seen Sarah near the shredder bin around the time the Garcia chart had gone missing. It was all the ammunition Thompson needed. The summons this time was not an email. It was a charge nurse relaying a direct order. Thompson wants to see you, now. The walk to his office felt like a walk to the gallows. When she entered, the pretense of civility had been vaporized. Thompson was standing behind his desk, his jacket off, his knuckles white as he gripped its edge. His face was a thundercloud. The game is over, Miss Jenkins, he seethed, the words clipped and sharp. I know you disposed of the intake forms. I know you have been systematically lying to me, to your fellow staff, and to a police officer. You have deliberately obstructed hospital procedure and exposed this institution to a level of legal liability that is frankly staggering. Sarah stood her ground, her silence her only shield. Leo Garcia is stable enough for a transfer conversation. His father, Marco Garcia, regained consciousness 40 minutes ago and is being weaned off the ventilator. I have posted hospital security at their doors. The time for your little charade is over. He pointed a finger at her, his whole body trembling with rage. You have exactly 1 hour, until 10 p.m. You will go to that unit, you will obtain the correct information from the parents, you will input it into the system, and you will personally call Officer Miller to provide it to him. If you do not, he took a step closer, his voice dropping to a venomous hiss, I will have you physically escorted from this building by security. I will personally draft and file a formal complaint with the State Nursing Board to have your license permanently revoked. And I will give a full, detailed statement to the police regarding your active and deliberate obstruction of justice. 1 hour, Ms. Jenkins. Your career ends at 10 o'clock. The air crackled with the force of his fury. Sarah felt a strange sense of calm descend upon her. The worst had happened. The fear of the fall was gone, replaced by the certainty of the impact. She turned without a word and walked out, leaving him sputtering in his glass cage. She didn't go to the ICU. She went to a small, dark supply closet on the third floor, the air thick with the smell of bleach and sterile gauze. She pulled out her phone, her hands shaking now that the immediate confrontation was over. Her career, her future, her freedom, all of it was dissolving like sand through her fingers. She could give up. She could walk back to the ICU, get the names, make the call, and maybe salvage some wreckage of her life. But then she saw Leo's face in her mind, small, pale, and utterly helpless. She saw Elena's terror. She heard her Babsha's voice. "You must choose which one you are, Sarunia." Her thumb scrolled frantically through her contacts. She stopped on a name, Father Michael. He was an old family friend, a priest who ran a downtown church known for its no-questions-asked outreach. She pressed call. "St. Jude's Rectory," Father Michael speaking. "Michael, it's Sarah Jenkins," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm in trouble. I need help. I need a place for a family to disappear, just for a few days. Please, no questions." There was a pause on the other end, and for a heart-stopping second, she thought he would refuse. Then his voice came back, calm and steady as a rock. "The basement door behind the rectory, the one that leads to the boiler room. It will be unlocked in 20 minutes. Bring them, Sarah. God be with you." She hung up, a desperate, impossible plan forming in her mind. The escape was a symphony of adrenaline and terror. First, the diversion. Sarah knew the hospital's systems. She went to an empty ward in a different wing and used her override code to trigger a code yellow. It wasn't a fire alarm that would cause a lockdown, but an external disaster alert that would cause confusion and pull staff, including some security, toward the main ER to prepare for a non-existent mass casualty event. In the ensuing chaos, she raced to the PICU. She slipped into Leo's room. Elena was there, her eyes wide with fear. Marco was awake, groggy but lucid. "We have to go, now," Sarah said, her voice low and urgent. "There is a man who will help you, but we have to go right now." There was no time for questions. Trust was their only currency. Sarah helped Marco, weak and unsteady, out of bed. She put Leo, wrapped in a blanket over his hospital gown, into a wheelchair. With Elena pushing the IV pole Marco was still attached to, they slipped out of the room. They moved through the hospital's hidden arteries, the echoing service corridors, the rumbling freight elevator that smelled of grease and old laundry. Every distant footstep was a thunderclap. Every security camera felt like a judgment. Once, they heard the jingle of keys and flattened themselves into a dark linen closet, the smell of bleach sharp in their nostrils, as a security guard strolled past, humming off key. The 5 seconds he took to pass felt like an eternity. Finally, they reached a service exit, a heavy steel door that opened into a dark, rain-slicked alley. A beat-up brown van was idling there, its headlights off. The side door slid open, and Father Michael's kind, worried face appeared. "Get in, quickly," he urged. Elena turned to Sarah, her face wet with a mixture of rain and tears. She threw her arms around her, a desperate, grateful hug. "God bless you, Sarah. God bless you," she sobbed. Marco, leaning heavily on the van, simply looked at her. He didn't have the strength to speak, but the look in his eyes, a look of profound, life-altering gratitude, said more than words ever could. Sarah helped them in, disconnected the IV, and slammed the door shut. She watched the van's taillights disappear into the night, taking with them the family she had saved and every last shred of her own future. She didn't run. She turned and walked back into the hospital, her head held high, her steps even. She walked straight to the top floor, back to Thompson's office. The hour was up. He was on the phone, his face livid. "What do you mean they're gone?" he roared. He saw Sarah standing in his doorway and slammed the phone down. The rage in his eyes was pure and triumphant. He had her. "You are finished," he spat, the words dripping with venom. "You are fired, effective immediately. Security is on its way. By morning, every relevant authority in this state will have your name and what you've done." The 2 security guards were professional but cold. They escorted her to her locker, watched as she numbly packed her few personal belongings, a spare pair of scrubs, a photo of her and her sister, a well-worn nursing textbook into a small cardboard box. The walk out of the hospital was the longest of her life. It was the walk of shame. She passed colleagues she had known for years. Some looked away, their faces a mixture of fear and pity. Others just stared. She was a pariah, an example of what happens when you break the rules. As the automatic glass doors slid shut behind her, cutting off the familiar sounds and smells of the world that had defined her, she stood on the pavement, clutching her box, the cold night air, a slap in the face. She had lost everything. And for a moment, under the indifferent glow of the streetlights, she couldn't be sure it had been worth it. The next morning, Sarah's apartment was a tomb. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. She sat on her couch, still in the scrubs she'd been fired in, the cardboard box of her professional life sitting on the coffee table like a coffin. Her phone had buzzed itself to death with texts and calls from worried friends and colleagues, but she couldn't bring herself to answer. Her gaze was fixed on the nursing license framed on her wall, its embossed seal and official script now seeming like a cruel joke. Every choice she'd made in the last 24 hours unspooled in her mind, a long, tangled thread of disaster. Then came the knock. It wasn't a tentative tap. It was a sharp, authoritative rap-to quick knocks that sounded final. Her blood ran cold. It was the police. Thompson had made good on his promise. They had come to arrest her. She pictured the handcuffs, the mugshot, the public disgrace. Taking a single, steadying breath, she stood up, walked to the door, and opened it, ready to face the consequences. But it wasn't the police. Standing in her doorway were not two uniformed officers, but a man and a woman in impeccably tailored dark business suits. They radiated an aura of quiet, serious authority that made local law enforcement look like amateurs. The woman, who looked to be in her 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun, stepped forward. "Sarah Jenkins?" she asked, her voice calm and measured. "I'm Director Isabel Ramirez, Homeland Security. May we come in?" Sarah's mind reeled. Homeland Security? This was infinitely worse. Her stomach plummeted. This had to be about the Garcias. They must have been caught. She had led these wolves right to their door. Numbly, she stepped back, letting them into her small living room. The man, silent and imposing, closed the door behind them. Director Ramirez didn't waste time with pleasantries. She sat on the armchair opposite Sarah, her gaze direct and penetrating. "Ms. Jenkins, I want you to listen to me very carefully. We are not here to arrest you. We're here because last night you did something that our entire department has been trying and failing to do for the last 6 months." Sarah stared, her mind unable to process the words. They were a jumble of sounds that made no sense. Ramirez leaned forward slightly. "The Garcia family. We have been tracking them since they crossed the border. Not to deport them, Ms. Jenkins. To protect them." The room tilted. Sarah gripped the arm of the couch to steady herself. "Marco Garcia is not just a refugee seeking a better life," Ramirez continued, her voice precise and factual. "He's a former logistics manager for the MS-13 syndicate. He wasn't just a mechanic. He handled their supply lines in Central America. He has intimate knowledge of their smuggling routes, their financial networks, their leadership structure. He approached one of our assets in Mexico and agreed to become a federal witness. He was coming here to testify in a RICO case that could dismantle their entire North American operation. He and his family were on their way into our protection when we lost contact with them 2 days ago." The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture so vast and unbelievable Sarah could hardly grasp it. "The car accident," Ramirez said, her eyes hard as steel. "It wasn't an accident. It was a targeted assassination attempt by the syndicate to silence him. They nearly succeeded. And then your hospital administrator, Mr. Richard Thompson, in his zealous, pig-headed adherence to protocol, was about to have our single most important federal witness in the Western Hemisphere either arrested by local police or reported to ICE. Had his name gone into any of those databases, the syndicate would have had him located within hours. He, his wife, and his son would have been dead within a week. You didn't just break the rules, Ms. Jenkins. You broke their chain of attack. You hiding them, getting them out. You saved the entire federal case. More importantly, you saved their lives. The release was so sudden and so total, it was like a physical blow. The crushing weight of failure, of guilt, of professional ruin, evaporated in an instant, leaving her lightheaded and breathless. Ramirez allowed herself a small, thin smile. "I had a very illuminating conversation with the board of directors at Mercy General, an hour ago. I explained, in detail, how their administrator's risk management policies nearly compromised a multi-million-dollar federal investigation and directly endangered the lives of 3 people under federal protection. Mr. Point 10, Thompson has been placed on indefinite administrative leave, pending a thorough investigation and, I suspect, his termination. The board offers its sincerest apologies and has assured me that your job is not only safe, but that they would be honored if you chose to return. She stood to leave, the silent man opening the door for her. At the threshold, Ramirez paused and turned back to Sarah, her expression losing its professional severity and softening into one of genuine, unadulterated respect. "Bureaucracy and protocol are meant to create order," she said, her voice quiet but resonant in the silent apartment. "But sometimes, they suffocate morality. They give people an excuse to stop thinking, to stop feeling. You were faced with a choice between following the rules and protecting a human life. You chose to be a nurse first. You chose to be a human being first." She took a step closer. "On behalf of the Department of Homeland Security, and on behalf of a family that is alive today because of you, I want to personally thank you, Ms. Jenkins. Your courage is a rare and valuable commodity. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." A week later, a black sedan with government plates picked Sarah up from her apartment. It drove her not to a hospital or an office building, but to a quiet, anonymous-looking house in a leafy suburb. An agent led her inside. The house was filled with the smell of cooking and the sound of a children's cartoon on the television. The Garcia family was there, but they were transformed. The fear was gone from Elena's eyes, replaced by a warm, tired glow. Marco, looking healthier and stronger, stood up and shook Sarah's hand, his grip firm and his smile genuine. And then Leo came running from the other room, a small bandage on his forehead, the only remnant of the nightmare. He ran straight to Sarah and wrapped his arms around her legs in a fierce hug. She knelt down and held him, the solid, living warmth of him a testament to the choice she had made. It was a hug that healed every wound, every doubt, every fear she had harbored. It was the feeling of a life saved. In a brief, satisfying scene she would only hear about later, Richard Thompson was seen clearing out his sterile top-floor office, his movements stiff and defeated. He placed his chrome desk accessories and motivational paperweights into a cardboard box, a mirror image of Sarah's own humiliating exit, before being quietly escorted from the building, his career and reputation in tatters. A month after that, Sarah was back in the ER at Mercy General. The rhythm was the same, the controlled chaos, the smell of antiseptic, the steady beat of the monitors. A new family was brought in, a mother and her sick child, their clothes worn, their faces etched with worry and fear. A rookie nurse, sorting through their paperwork, muttered under her breath, "Great, no insurance, I bet." The old Sarah might have sighed in weary agreement, but the woman who stood there now was different. She had been tested in a fire she never asked for, and had emerged stronger, her moral compass now forged in steel. She looked at the frightened family, then at the rookie nurse. Her expression was no longer just one of compassion, but of fierce, quiet strength. It was the look of a guardian. "Every person who comes through those doors is our responsibility," she said, her voice clear and firm, cutting through the noise of the ER. "All of them. Let's get to work." She walked toward her new patient, ready to help, her own unsworn oath to protect the vulnerable, to choose humanity over procedure, no matter the cost now, the unwavering core of her being.